Welcome to the cityCURRENT Show. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making an impact in our community and around the globe. And in today's digital era, studies show that children spend less than an hour a day outside, yet several hours in front of their screens. And the question is, are we compromising our children's development by losing touch with nature? Today, we're fortunate to be joined by landscape architect, garden fanatic, mom of twins, and nature play expert and owner of N is for Nature Play, Jena Jauchius, who argues for the profound impact of nature play on our children's growth and well-being. Jena's work aligns with neuroscience in the enchanting realm of childhood to demonstrate that our children have not just 5, but 7 sensory systems that need healthy stimulation from the natural world. So today we're going to traverse the whimsical pathways of sensory-rich nature play, understand the inherent wisdom in our children, and explore how to create enriching play spaces that celebrate their unique connection with nature. Jena, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's my favorite introduction I've ever gotten. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here too, because I was telling you before we started recording, I was listening to some of the podcasts you've been on before, and I just wanted to just pull over and really just see for myself just the incredible work that you've built, not only in your home, but the landscape architecture that you've done in so many other areas for other people as well. So how did you get into the field of landscape architecture and nature play design?
Well, for landscape architecture, it was actually when I was in high school, I was thinking about being a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. And my mom actually suggested landscape architecture because I was always outside and I was really good at drawing. And of course, I had no idea what it was. And so I went to school for it kind of blindly and fell in love with it. And I had the good fortune of bumping into children's environments when I was during my master's work. So really early on in my career. And so I've been designing children's play, learning, and therapeutic landscapes for 23 years now, almost my entire career. So yeah, I feel really fortunate that I do the work that I love and have done it for so long.
Well, and I love that it's really providing an opportunity for children and adults alike to get out and really experience something that we should have not shied away from with the advances of technology, but really used to get out and explore and just be a part of nature. And so there's a term sensory in a lot of different industries that has been really over the past probably decade and a half that has continued to sort of ramp up. So what does it mean when you talk about the phrase sensory rich nature play, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's important. So just to give some background, for almost my entire career, I've been focusing on designing for children with autism and sensory processing disorders and other neurodiversities. And so that's where this term that I've wrapped this term sensory rich into nature play. And your listeners are probably like, well, nature play, it's based in nature. Isn't that kind of already sensory rich? And the answer is absolutely yes. However, in my work, I use the term because I'm intentionally creating sensory experiences based on what individual children need. And so all children benefit from as much sensory play as possible, inside, outside. Outside's better, obviously, because, nature is the best quality sensory experience we can offer them. But some children might need a little bit different sensory stimulation. Kiddos with neurodiversities might have sensitivities, whether they are hypersensitive, meaning their bodies are getting too much sensory information, and you need to turn the dial. If you think of it in terms of a dial, you're turning it up or down, you turn the dial down so you give them less of that particular stimulation. Children with hyposensitivities, meaning their bodies aren't getting enough information, so they're constantly seeking out different activities or different ways to stimulate that particular sensory system. So we want to give them opportunities to turn that dial up and to get higher intensities of sensory experiences. So yeah, that's kind of the broad description of sensory rich, but really it's just intentionally giving them as many different types of sensory stimulation as possible through their play and learning activities.
You talk about the 7 senses. Can you elaborate on these 7 sensory systems in children?
Yeah. So, of course, there's the 5 senses that we all know and love. We're super familiar with: sight, touch, taste, smell, and sound. And you can probably just in your mind think about different ways that those experiences are offered in outdoor play and learning. Colorful plantings, fragrant plantings, mud kitchens are multi-sensory, but there's 2 more that are movement-based sensory systems. And if you've ever had a child that has worked with an occupational therapist, you've probably heard the terms the vestibular system and the proprioceptive system, or proprioception. And so the vestibular system is located in our inner ear, and it has to do with our body's relationship to a gravitational pull. So are we upside down? Are we right side up? Are we sideways? Our vestibular system tells us that. And so if you've ever had vertigo, or you've ever wanted to puke after getting off a roller coaster ride, that's your vestibular system might be unhappy. And so vestibular activities for kids might be swinging, rolling down a grassy slope, spinning around, riding their bike, anything that rocking, crawling, running, anything that is movement relative to the gravitational pull, climbing. So as you can imagine, there's lots of different activities that stimulate the vestibular system. And then the proprioceptive system is really fascinating to me because it has to do with a couple things. First of all, of the 7, it's fully internal, meaning it doesn't require any exterior stimulation in order for it to detect for the system to work. And so it has to do with 2 things, and it's our body awareness system. So where our bodies are at relative to the things around us in space, where our limbs are at relative to our core or the rest of us. And so an example would be like if you were going into a restaurant, so your proprioceptive system would navigate you through the door, through all the various seats and tables to find your seat to sit down. For kids, same thing, that it's at play it's in action all the time during all of their activities, essentially. The other thing it does is it's focused on the use of force to do an activity. And so the example I always give is, I'm thirsty, I have a paper cup in front of me. It's my proprioceptive system. My brain communicates all the way down through my joints and ligaments and muscles and tendons and all that, all the way down to my fingertips. The amount of force it takes to pick up that paper cup without squishing it or without it letting it slide through my fingers. And so things like tying your shoes or using a crayon and fine motor skills, those are all proprioceptive activities, using garden tools. And so it's really important to give children opportunities to do that. And so for vestibular, it's like big body movements, swinging, running, biking, hopping, skipping. Proprioception can be, helping you garden, using tools, using a watering can. And so what I was just talking about, turning the dial up and the dial down. If you have a child who needs less proprioceptive stimulation, maybe you give them a small watering can that's just partially full. If you have a child who needs more proprioceptive stimulation, maybe you give them a bigger watering can and you fill it up more, and they have to use 2 hands and they're hefting it and that sort of thing. So their bodies are really getting the level of information that they need. And it's really fantastic because with so many of the senses, you can achieve that with very simple tools, like sight, magnifying glasses, taste, you can have a picnic outside, sound, maybe a set of wind chimes or something. So it doesn't have to be big, magnificent changes to your backyard. You can add things in very simply to feed all 7 systems for them.
Well, Jena, when you're talking about this, it's really making me think about my backyard and my surrounding and the way that I create this naturescape for my children and I think I will now forever think of it in a different way after talking to you, because it puts an emphasis on, okay, yes, the wind chimes are there for a reason. The garden, and allowing them to water the plants, albeit probably a little bit too much water than I probably would. But allowing them to have these opportunities to be in nature and stimulate their senses to
Yes.
not only learn, but to grow and thrive. And I think it's such a cool way to think about how we can utilize the nature around us, many times free or very affordable ways, to create this sensory place for them to be in nature.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's really
absolutely,
cool.
Andrew. Yeah, because really what it all does is that it feeds their nervous system in the way that so that they will thrive. And our nervous system, especially in childhood, is so important to develop because it's basically our environmental detection system. Like our senses are how we perceive our world. And when kids are popped out in the world, it's their mission for quite a few years to gather as much information as they can so that they can understand their world and their place within it and themselves into adulthood. And so really it's like it depends on which expert you ask. Is it 0 to 3? Is it 0 to 5? Is it 0 to 7 or beyond are the most important years? And I mean, for me, it's like, 0 to 7 is truly a magical time. It's, their bodies are they're developing so fast. And just that's when they really want to get as much information as they can. But really, if you can give them, nature-based spaces when they're in middle school or when they're in high school, they're still going to get value from that. It's still going to benefit them as adults. And so, yeah, the other thing that you made me think of when you're talking is just the time. Kids aren't bored anymore because we kind of fill their days with things, and some of it is screens. A lot of the time it's screens, unfortunately, and I'm guilty too. So, but just the time to be outside. My kids will come up to me and say, "Mom, I'm bored." Okay, well then, you need to go outside, and it's okay to be bored because that's when your imagination kicks in, and imagination is children's superpower. And so give them the time to be bored, and it's okay. And the other thing you made me think of is if parents can spend time outside with them, then that's just like a dozen cherries on the sundae, right? Because it's good for you too. And so I always, when I talk about parents and spending time with their kids outside, you don't have to do the activity with them. You don't have to play at the fairy garden with them necessarily. You can do your own thing. Maybe you're reading your book. Maybe you want to work in your little edible garden space, whatever. But it's parallel play, right? The parents are doing their play, the children are doing their play. They're both getting the benefit of time outside. Parents need their nervous systems calmed down too, because when we're all working from a healthy, happy nervous system, that's when we can all be our best selves. That's when kids can learn and play to their greatest extent. It's when we can all connect with one another to our greatest ability. And we just are able to grow from that point. And we cannot do that when our nervous systems are dysregulated or imbalanced or really unhappy. We're just kind of in a state of arrest. We can't grow. And so we all want to be in a place where our nervous systems are happy and healthy, and then we're growing.
For a while, I was struggling a lot with my mental health and decided that, okay, a lot of people struggle with like seasonal depression. And as the
Yeah.
spring sort of took place, I thought I'm going to take a little bit of a more holistic approach this year and be more intentional in building a vegetable garden and, expand upon the idea. And also, as my children begin to grow and understand, okay, I eat strawberries every single day, and now I want them to be able to see them in their own backyard and how they grow and how that can sort of become part of their mindful ecosystem on how the world works. And so for me, it's been very beneficial to be out in nature every single morning, to water the vegetables and fruit and see them growing, albeit very small, every single day. And the patience that it takes. But then also when my kids want to go outside, and and explore and play on the playground, but also water the plants and stuff. And we don't live on a multitude of land. We have probably a half acre, maybe an acre. So I mean, it's a
Oh,
very small area, but we have it intentionally full with a lot of places to play. And so it's been really cool to see how their minds have changed and worked and how they want to be more outside because there's places for them to play in the splash pad, or it is with bubbles, or play in the dirt and stuff. And that's something that I definitely want to expand upon, and that's what I love about your work and with N is for Nature Play. And so you were doing this work and then you had children, so twins
yeah,
at that. And so
yeah.
how did that change your mindset of, okay, now I have research like hands-on research every day that can
Yep.
help me in the work that I'm doing? How did that sort of change your mindset? But then also tell us more about your sensory garden at home, how you built
Oh,
it, and
yeah.
how does it benefit your daughters?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So actually, when they were born, actually, it was a little bit before they were born. That's when I was really starting to get into the sensory systems and really digging in about how important they are in the nervous system. But when they were born, um, I don't know. I mean, there are things, I mean, no matter what profession you're in, there are things that your kids can teach you that no amount of professional experience ever could. So seeing them all the time, day to day, outside, and their interests are so different, and their sensory, what they're drawn to is so different. It was just, I don't know. I mean, it was just really eye-opening, and I wouldn't have known. I don't know. It connects the heart for me. It connected my heart so much more to my work, and seeing them outside, seeing them in our own sensory garden, and knowing that I was doing the best possible job as a mom that I could, and that my job gave me that drive to do that. It just gave me a whole level of appreciation greater for the work that I do. But I've always been an advocate for kids, so it's just been a beautiful experience. And so you're asking about our sensory garden at home. So I just kind of dedicated a corner of our yard to, I knew I wanted to do some sort of nature play area. I didn't know what, but then when I started digging into the senses, I'm like, well, they have to have a sensory garden. That's just a no-brainer now, right? And so, of course, it grew as something for them, first and foremost. But then I, of course, went into it going, this could be a demonstration area where I could teach or show the value to, parents and early childhood folks, et cetera, educators. And so it kind of grew with those two things in mind. And so if you go on my website, N is for Nature Play, there's a ton of photos. If you go on my Facebook page, N is for Nature Play, there's a ton of photos of my own garden. One of the biggest features in it is a sensory path, which is a pathway made out of a variety of surfacing materials. It's a multi-sensory feature. It stimulates 6 of the 7 senses. And so that it's kind of been an infinity symbol to give them kind of a looping pathway to access the different features. And so I have log climber area. I've got a big fairy garden area with kind of an overhead structure for climbing roses for one of my daughters. I have a mud kitchen that's turned into a maker space because when the kids were young, they loved the mud kitchen, but my older twin really loves making things. And so when they're starting to outgrow the mud kitchen, we just changed out the accessories and turned it into a place where she can make things. And so now I'm kind of exploring, how does the garden grow and evolve with the kids' changing developmental needs and interests? So that's been kind of a fun journey in and of itself. But I have garden statues and chimes, and I think I mentioned sensory plantings, edible plants, as many edible plants as possible. Because if you think about everything that goes into your play space at home, it probably should be edible. At minimum, it should be non-toxic, right? Because you can assume, especially for the little ones, that it's going to go in their mouths, right? So you have to be really kind of intentional about what are some of the plant materials that you can include out there. And there's lots of resources on the internet about what is safe for kids. And it's like, no matter what zone you're in, no matter what part of the world you're in, there is a plethora of plants to include in any child's space.
I love that you do have this multi approach where there's different stations. And it's really cool that because you are a mom, not only a landscape architect, but a mom, now knowing, okay, how does the garden grow as my children grow? Because for one, if you have a client, it's a very typically an innate like time period. And so, they may come back to you and say, okay, now my child is exploring this or that, or maybe we've discovered some sensory developments that we would like to sort of dive into. And so for you to now say, okay, how can I make this garden continue to grow as my children grow? That's a really cool aspect of the work that you're doing. I did ask on Facebook before earlier today, like, okay, I'm interviewing a landscape architect, expert in sensory gardens and naturescapes. What do you want to know and learn? And someone did say, okay, what should I be planting that is edible? Because my 1-year-old loves to eat everything outside. And so maybe what are a couple no-brainer type edible flowers, plants, vegetables, fruit that are maybe easy to grow or that are easy to thrive that you would say are definites to put in there?
Okay. Well, without knowing exactly where they're at in the nation, I would say strawberries, and of course you have to take in mind any allergy considerations. Strawberries, blueberries. I have a dwarf thornless raspberry that you can get online. It's called bushel and berry thornless raspberry. And it will take over like raspberries do. But if you have a place where you have kind of a wild space or in a pot, you can have these dwarf thornless raspberries. There are so many options for edible flowers. So nasturtium, calendula, marigold, dahlia, peony. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Those little spring violets or Johnny jump ups, pansies. And so it's really fun. Like we'll go out and pick a few things out of the garden and stick them in our salad. And the kids love eating the flowers on the salad. It's really like, I don't know, it's kind of magical. And so you can go out and do that. Dandelions. So things that we consider weeds. Dandelions, every aspect of them is edible and beneficial for you. And so you can look at what can you forage from your yard, and of course, please don't spray pesticides, and please don't forage when you are in a known area for spray and that sort of thing, because you don't want to be ingesting that. But what can you forage in your yard? And of course, fruit trees, apple trees. There's so many different kinds of berry bushes, honeyberry. I just bought aronia, and it's a superfood. So how can you add in to your landscape these kind of covert edible plants, right? And so, I mean, how fun is it for kids to be able to graze while they play? Like I'm playing under the aronia, I've got strawberries all around me. I'm going to have some snacks while dad's not watching. And so, I mean, the studies show that the more kids are involved with the growing of food plants, the more likely they are to eat them and the more likely they are to share them with their family. So that's that holistic health we're talking about.
It's such like a no-brainer. Like when you think about it and you think about your ancestors and times past when technology wasn't readily available, and how so many people did benefit from being outside of nature and like just having plants readily available for them to have medicinal purposes and stuff like that. It's like, why did we get away from that? And I'm sure that's a whole other podcast that we can focus on. But because especially with food deserts in the Memphis and Nashville area in particular, where I have the most sort of expertise, there are a lot of nonprofits that are now putting in nature play and vegetable gardens and farm to table type aspects in their child development type nonprofits, because they see the benefits and how when the child knows, like you said, where their food comes from, then they can hold maybe their parent more accountable into, okay, yeah, we can build a vegetable garden or fruit garden on our porch, or, what
Yep.
have you. You don't have to have these massive garden spaces. And
You
that's what I
don't.
just love about this whole topic. And it's been, especially becoming a parent, it's been more on my heart to talk about. And
Yeah.
so let's dive in a little bit about N is for nature play. You did mention that. And what sort of those services are, workshops, how does that look to partner with you to really expand your own sensory garden, either for maybe your nonprofit, your school, your home? How does that work?
Yeah. So, traditionally over the course of my 20 some years, I've done designs for specific people and spaces, which I still do, but I realized that that's not the way to get the information out to the masses of people who need it. And so I am new, but I do have a couple of ways to connect. So for those looking for deeper information, I have a couple ebooks out that are on Gumroad. I just like last week completed my first course on how to build a sensory path. So it's like 6 modules that walks you through each of the steps to plan out and build a sensory path, because it's one of my favorite natural play and learning features. And then I do have a new course coming out in the next month or two that will be kind of an 8-week walkthrough of the 7 senses, and and it gives you a different lens to look through in your space, and it teaches you how to tailor a play and learning landscape to your child's needs. And so that would be applicable for parents, early childhood folks, educators. And so that I plan on holding that a couple times a year live. And then I also will have an on-demand course coming out that is kind of a shortened version of the 8-week course. So, and of course, there's ways to work with me one-on-one as well. And you just get a hold of me through my website or on social media. I can be found either place very easily.
Now, what puts a smile on your face when you look at the work that you've been able to do for decades on creating enriching plays, spaces, and helping children celebrate their unique connection with nature?
Yeah, pretty much everything about it. I love the educators and early childhood professionals and parents that I've worked with. I've loved to see their excitement and having them reconnect with nature and with the children within them. But I also love the stories that I hear from them about the kids that have benefited through this approach. And of course, when I have the opportunity to watch them in action in the spaces that I've worked on. But, one story, I worked at a elementary school. I designed an outdoor learning classroom for this school south of where I live in Spokane. And it was this boy who had a really troubled growing up, abuse and that sort of thing. And he was really struggling in school. He was one of those kids that if there was an open door, he would just run. And so as we were working out in the space, he'd bust through the door, and then there's the aide chasing after him, and he was, just happy to be free for a moment. But when they started working with him in the outdoor space, he was doing things that he could not and would not do in the classroom. He started counting seeds, counting them by 5s and putting them in holes, focusing, and just hearing that story about this child who has been struggling for so long, to hear them thrive in a situation that I was involved in helping enhance, enhancing an environment for that school. That's when it's like, yeah, I'm spending my time well. I'm spending my career time well. So
I love that.
yeah.
It really is life-changing and transforming. And when you got into landscape architecture, did you think there would be a big psychological aspect to it? Or did you go in knowing that you wanted to have more of a cohesiveness in the developmental side through learning? Or did that sort of develop over time?
Developed over time. The psychological aspect I knew was always there, because I've always been interested in creating space or creating something. but realizing the impact it has on kids when we are creating environments that help them thrive, that is definitely something that evolved in my understanding. I just didn't get that suddenly when I started school. But that's really where the power lies, because all children are coded to thrive, no matter what their human expression is, no matter what disabilities, and I do quote because they are still all coded to thrive, no matter how they're what they're experiencing, right? And so when they don't thrive, that's one of the first things we need to look at is their environment, and what is it about their environment that is creating an obstacle for them to thrive. It doesn't have the opportunity there to thrive, and so we need to start enhancing and modifying and adapting our environments so that they support kids of all abilities and all diversities.
I love that. I love that way of looking at it and how it really does all play together, and that every child is built to thrive, because that is true. Jena, one more time, where can people go to learn more, to follow you, and to hire you for your efforts with N is for Nature Play?
The easy one is my website, nisfornatureplay.com. And then on Facebook, I have a business page, N is for Nature Play, so just search for that. But then I would also invite your audience to join my new private group called Sensory Rich Nature Play. And so you can search for that in groups, and it's easy to find there. So, and that's really where, for my work, kind of the daily or weekly magic is happening. And I give lots of tips and ideas and answering questions and that sort of thing in that group. And so that's kind of where the activity is.
Well, Jena Jauchius, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for highlighting the importance of being out in nature and the profound impact that nature play has on children's growth and well-being. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. It's such a pleasure to talk with you.